Welcome to the Flock and Hive podcast, a place for curious minds to explore all that makes life so weird and wonderful. And this week,
There's two big differences. EMDR, the client is alert, awake, empowered, like here, present in this moment. Unlike hypnotism, which is like a trance-like state, which is very different. An uneducated therapist could make a suggestion, So that's why I'm not a fan of hypnotism. I feel that it's therapist-led. The client is not empowered. EMDR, it's clients empowered, they're present, and it's client led.
We talked to Mercedes Cusik about EMDR.
welcome back to the Flock and Hive podcast. It is series 3.
Hello. I've missed this.
I thought you were going to say I miss you, but okay, well, fine.
Well, I've seen you. I've stayed at your house. But no, I've really missed using my brain in this way, exercising it in not just looking after children in the summer holidays. No, it's really lovely to be back and to have a really meaty, excellent subject with an excellent interviewee today. We're talking to Mercedes Cusik about EMDR, which means eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Sounds convoluted, but the interview describes it beautifully. She's wonderful at explaining it and is very passionate about it.
Yes, so this came about in the 1980s. A lady called Francine Shapiro developed it essentially to help people with PTSD. It's all about healing traumatic experiences and distressing memories. So trauma with a big T, but actually it's been found to be effective in like things that aren't quite as massive as that, but still have a huge impact on your mental health.
Mm. And did you just want to describe further a little bit the actual physical element of the bilateral stimulation?
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, thank you. Um, it's a therapy that a lot of us might be aware of, if not knowing exactly what it is, around eye movement. And what that is something called bilateral stimulation. We don't go into it in too much detail, which is why I thought it'd be useful just to say what that is now. Basically, EMDR involves stimulating both sides of the brain with it in an alternating rhythmic pattern using lights or sounds, etc. And this going from left to right is believed to facilitate the processing of traumatic memories and the integration of those memories into more, well, less distressing forms, basically. So it is very much that kind of physical, using your eyes, using your ears, left to right, left to right.
But what it isn't, though, it's nowhere near hypnotherapy, is it?
That's the thing, because I thought it was. Don't know about you,
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons why I've sort of not looked into it as much, because I don't think I can be hypnotized. Everyone says that, right? I don't think I can be, and also I didn't want to feel manipulated, but it's not at all that.
Yeah, very much client led, she goes on to talk about.
Yeah, she does. It does make me think what it also isn't, though, sister of mine. Can you tell what's coming?
I can.
It isn't something called oculomancy, which is the word of the week.
That's nice. Have no idea what it is. Like ocular eyes.
Yeah.
Mm, oh, I actually can't think. No. What? Tell me.
And oculomancy, oh, why can I never say these things? But it refers to the practice of divination or gaining insight through watching someone's eyes. And it's not widely recognized as a form of divination, but and it appears in lots of folklore and sort of occult traditional things, etc., where the eyes are considered to be windows to the soul. But yeah, it's essentially watching someone's eyes for clues about what they're thinking.
So reading body language.
Yeah, essentially part of that.
Ages ago, I heard something along the lines of if you're talking to someone and they look to the left, it means they're lying. But then I got a bit obsessed. So every time I'd talk to someone, and if I looked to the left, I'd start freaking out, thinking like, "Oh my god, they're going to think I'm lying." And then I'd just be really weird and sort of stare straight ahead and like not naturally react in any way. And I got way too caught up in wondering what I was giving away when really, actually, there wasn't anything. It was just being worried how I was coming across.
Oh my god, and then looking extra shifty in the
Yeah,
process.
yes. Just
Yeah, no, but I remember that. I can't remember what, hang on, let's have a look, hang on. So you say looking up and to the left, looking up to the right. So yes, looking up and to the right was thought to indicate, this says, Mr. Google says, that the person, um, the person is constructing or fabricating a story, i.e., maybe telling a lie, but we know they're accessing the creative side of their brain if you're looking up and to the right. Whereas to the left, it's about accessing memories and storage
Mm.
basically, which is more associated with telling the truth because the story is already there. You're not having to fabricate it. So looking up to the left is meant to be the truth. Looking up to the right is meant to be fabrication. However, it's a lot more convoluted like that, and apparently that's all bollocks.
Oh, so all that worry for nothing. Story of my life.
Do you remember being obsessed with looking into boys' pupils because I was told that, if they widen, which I think is true actually, they fancy you.
Oh,
I think, yeah, if something's attractive to you, your pupils will widen.
oh God. But then that's even weirder too. It's like just staring at them, like trying to check them out.
And weirdly, I don't like eye contact with anyone really, apart from my children. It freaks me out. Wonder what Mercedes would say about that.
Well, it is orcs, isn't it? Looking right into someone's eyes.
Especially if you've got two of them, you never know where to look.
You end up going cross-eyed.
So all of these things are what EMDR isn't.
Yeah. Maybe stop talking about what this podcast isn't about and hand over to the expert.
Yes, let's do that right now. So, without further ado, let's hear from Mercedes Cusik about EMDR. Mercedes, thank you so much for joining us on the Flock and Hive podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
As you may know, my sister and I come from a medical background, but this is something that we never came across in all that time. And so we would love you to tell us and our listeners all about it. And that thing is EMDR therapy. So before we get stuck into that, please tell us a little bit more about you, who you are, and what you do professionally.
Again, my name is Mercedes Cusik. I am an advanced trained EMDR therapist. That is my main lane. I focus on complex trauma, PTSD, narcissistic abuse. And I've been doing some sort of therapy or counseling for the better part of 2 decades, and I was introduced to being to therapy through my own struggles, and, I got sober about 17 and a half years ago, so it became very close to my heart to do something so, helpful to change people's lives because it changed my life.
So being sober was a huge part of what you went on to do. And is that and staying sober, is that again a vital part of what you do?
Vital part. I'm a very active member of my recovery journey and I give back and I speak at hospitals. If I'm not sober, I definitely cannot be helpful to my clients, to my family. So it's a huge, huge part of my life.
So I know that there are lots of different techniques that you use in your therapy work, but a big one is EMDR. We'll cover
Yes.
the others a little later because I know that they can be related as well. But let's focus on that for the moment. Please tell us, what is that exactly? What does it mean and how does it work?
So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And essentially, it reduces traumatic experiences and it allows you to reprocess an event. So maybe something that happened in childhood in which you were not safe, you felt unlovable through the through EMDR. Gets reprocessed as I am lovable, I am safe because today that is the case.
Okay. And do you have to know what the problem was in the first place?
That's a great question. Most people that come to me, they're pretty well aware that there was something that happened growing up, or it's a relationship situation or a big trauma, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it is their life just shows up in a way that they just don't understand why they keep getting into these abusive relationships. They don't know the core root of it. So it depends. But EMDR can really allow you to kind of figure out where the source is. Even if it's not from a frontal cortex, like that logical, rational place in your brain. Like you're like, I know something happened. I don't know what. I get that a lot.
So what does it look like in a session?
Well, EMDR is it's a full comprehensive therapeutic modality. So a lot of people think EMDR is the reprocessing, which is the holding either buzzards or looking at a light bar. That is actually phase 4. So before any of that, because it would be extraordinarily traumatizing to be like, "Hi, just met you. Let's dive into your deepest trauma." So that's why it's 8 phases. So the first phase is history taking, kind of figuring out, what happened, if they know what happened, how they live their life today, what symptoms are being presented. Some people are like, "I'm just full of anxiety. I'm so depressed. I have thoughts of killing myself." These are all very important things to hear about. Figuring out also if they are a right fit for EMDR. Some people come to me and they're like, "Well, I've heard about EMDR and I want to do it." It's like, "Okay, well, let's make sure that it's a safe fit for you." People who dissociate a lot, I specialize in dissociation. It's something that I'm very well versed in. Not all EMDR therapists know what they're doing as far as dissociation, because that's when people tend to leave their body. So we need to make sure that it's a good fit. And also, sometimes there's a lot more work on the front end to make sure that they are ready to do phase 4, which is what everybody thinks is EMDR. So, in the beginning, it's really just getting to know your client, what's going on, what do they want to work on. I'm a big advocate of education. One of the reasons why my social media, specifically Instagram, is geared for what is EMDR, how does it affect the brain? Like, I've done hundreds of videos to explain it. So I want to make sure the client really understands like what we're going to be doing. It'll release a lot of anxiety, because everybody's just like, "What is this?" It's kind of woohooey. People just go like, I'm afraid." It's like, okay, I never start phase 4 until we're all on the same page. Like, they're like, "I have the resources," which means we've come up with some calming technique. In EMDR language, we call it resourcing. So that's basically grounding exercises to make sure that if they get very activated, which is likely, we're talking about trauma, that we have something to bring them down in the window of tolerance. So we want someone to stay at, clinically we call it a window of tolerance, which is they don't get too activated and dissociate, leave their body, and we don't want them to shut down and completely check out of their body. So there's a lot of before work. And any therapist that jumps straight in without doing the preliminary work, in my opinion, is reckless. I definitely want people to go to someone who is advanced trained that really knows what they're doing, especially if we're dealing with severe trauma. You don't want someone who kind of does EMDR, who's done like basic training, who's it's like their adjunct. It's like, "Oh yeah, I kind of do this, but not really." Those are not the people that you go to when you're dealing with, severe trauma.
Well, that's why we wanted to talk to you today, so I'm glad we've got the right person at least. So who would be an ideal candidate for EMDR?
Well, EMDR was originally back in like 19, I think it's 87, Francine Shapiro. It was created for PTSD. She realized all the research pointed to PTSD. So some people just think that that's what it's for, but it's great for depression, anxiety, phobias. For some reason, I've done a lot around birds. There's a lot of people with bird phobias. I don't know why. Um, Let's see, grief and loss. Loss of a loved one's a big one. Performance anxiety. I work with a lot of actors and comedians, getting up on stage. Addiction, especially when trauma is driving the addiction and that compulsive behaviors. And also chronic pain when trauma also is linked to the trauma. I mean, when the pain is linked to trauma. So it is good for so many of the mental health things that are out there. So there's very rarely does someone come in my office and I'm like, no, EMDR can't help you.
And is it appropriate for all ages as well, or do you only work with people above a certain age?
Personally, I work with typically about 16, 17 up to I've done up to 90. Um, there is a different when you're dealing with the littles, like like more of the teens and the littles, there's different protocols. So in EMDR, there's a standard protocol. but when there's people that specialize with children. So when I get a referral for anybody who's, pretty much 16, 17 and under, I steer them to people that's the population they work with, because you talk differently. The kids, you work more like from a play perspective and storytelling, because they have a different way of expressing their trauma.
Okay, that's good to know. You talk about this phase 4. It sounds like the famous phase 4. Is that what I have in my mind, which is where you're asking questions, or you're getting your patient to talk, and they're you're making their eyes move in different directions. I mean,
That is phase 4. Phase 4 can be done in many different ways. So the science is, it's called bilateral stimulation. So back originally, when Francine Shapiro figured this out, that it was decrease traumatic like activation, she would use her hand, and it would go back and forth, like from, across like a 2-foot radius. Nowadays, we have a lot of technology where you can hold buzzards and they vibrate back and forth. Headphones, alternate beeping, light bar, same type of thing. A color band goes across the light bar. So yes, a lot of different apparatuses. Now, phase 4 is the reprocessing, and that is when, once we have figured out what we're working on. And so for this conversation, we'll just say sexual abuse. Say the person, when they were 10, they know that something happened really inappropriately sexually with, say, their uncle. So they don't have a lot of information. They just know that something happened, and they have little flashes maybe of memory. It's very fragmented, because trauma gets stored very fragmented. And so we have to figure out a target image, which is a moment in time, a screenshot, not an event, but a moment. And the reason why we do a moment, it is so we can gauge if someone is going down in their level of disturbance. So, say we would have figured out in doing the preliminary work, when you look at this image. So, say the girl's 10 years old, poolside, wearing a bathing suit, and there's image of the uncle nearby, and she knows that's maybe, like, right before this thing happened, and that's the beginning, because it's like it's happening, she knows something's going to happen. So when she thinks about that, her today, not how she remembered it when she was a little kid, but you today, looking back on that 10-year-old self, what comes up? Oh, it's still a 10. Okay, so that's our starting point, a 10. We wanna get down to a 0 at the end of phase 4, or what's called ecologically a 0, because some people are like, "This horrible thing happened. I will never say it's a 0, but it is as low as it can get." That's
right,
good. So, in that phase 4, we have figured out the target image. So it's a screenshot, a moment in time. And when I think of that image, I feel I feel powerless, because knowing what's going to happen. So that's the negative cognition. So we have a target image and a negative cognition. And it's like, well, right now, you today, where do you feel that in your body? Oh God, I feel it in my stomach, or I feel it in my chest, like wherever it shows up. And that's a, bringing up the body is a huge part of EMDR, because trauma is stored in the body. So we want to incorporate the body, the feelings. When you think, you today, thinking back on when you were 10, what comes up? I'm scared, I'm sad, I'm angry, I feel violated, like all the emotions. So we gather this information right before we start the reprocessing. And it's client led, meaning I'm not going to be steering my client to go a certain direction. Unlike hypnosis, which they kind of steer, like you need to go this direction in hypnosis. EMDR is client led. So they hold the pulsators or whatever apparatus, and the therapist leads of, when bring up that target image, that negative cognition, I'm powerless. You feel that in your stomach, and the emotions of anger and sadness and scared. And then we turn on these devices or light bars, and we go for, it's really only like 30 seconds to a minute. And the reason why the pulsators work is it's activating the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain. And the EMDR goes down to the part of the brain, the amygdala. That's where trauma is stored and stuck. So we do it a minute at a time. So they go in, they don't talk, and for a minute, they hold. At the end, I say something like, "What do you notice?" Something along those lines. And they say what they notice. And so for the next however long the session is, it is literally minute by minute. I am checking in minute by minute. I personally keep notes of like their journey because I think it's very important to see their journey. Um, so sessions typically in weekly sessions, clients, will see their therapist. I don't know what it's like in the UK, but here it could be, 50 minutes, 75 minutes. Sometimes, well, I do intensives, which are much longer. So you do that minute by minute. And they go through this journey of the event, and everybody's different. So sometimes people are very linear and they can go through the trauma of like, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And through the time of working through a target, that could be many, many, many one sessions, like, in a repetitive, like every single week. Or if you have the luxury of doing the longer sessions, you can kind of work through a big target much faster. So the goal is at some point, I'm going to check in and say, and right now, where's your level of disturbance? When you look back on that target image back at that beginning, oh, it's now a 5. I know that we are decreasing that activation. So most time when you're doing, especially dealing with big trauma, you're not going to finish a trauma, a big trauma like being sexually molested in one session. So say at the end of the time, you're getting close to the time, the therapist should start then closing. And that is, making sure that they are regulated. They do a lot of times we do something called a container to put all the images and the memories in there. We do a lot of stuff just to calm the body, calm, peaceful place because we want them to leave the office not all activated. And then the next time that they come in, same type of thing. We start the target image. The target image, what do you notice now? What's the level of disturbance? Oh, it's a 5 or maybe it's gone down or maybe it's gone up. And then we just do it again and we do it again. And that's phase 4. We do it until the reprocessing, the traumatic memories are ecologically a 0 or a 0. And through that time, it's so interesting because people's brains have naturally, and that's the thing that I love about EMDR, the brain does its own healing. I'm not guiding the client to be like, "You need to go this direction." I'm staying out of their way. I keep safeguards. I kinda call it like almost like bumpers and bowling to make sure that they kinda stay what we're working on because the brain sometimes will wanna go to other events that are similar, sometimes relevant, sometimes not, and that's a therapist's decision. But I like to, keep them in a lane, and that is my job is to keep them safe and if things get too, sometimes it's like, "Do you need a break?" "Yes." "Is it a good time to stop?" "Yes." Always up to the client. Um, I always wanna empower the client. They get to do as much or as little as they want to do because it's a journey.
Well, I'm glad you explained that it wasn't like hypnotism because from an outsider's point of view, it could seem to be part of the same family, but it's not.
Yeah,
It's
no,
quite
I that's a big I get that a lot, and so there's 2 big differences. EMDR, the client is alert, awake, empowered, like, here, present in this moment. Unlike hypnotism, which is like a trance-like state, which is very different. Trance-like states in hypnotism, a therapist an uneducated therapist could make a suggestion of, wow, that feels like that could have been abuse or sexual abuse. People will get told a lot that they have sexual trauma and being hypnotized when there's just like maybe some indications that it could, keyword could have happened, but once a therapist in hypnotism says something like that, it's then in there. And so therefore it becomes this new belief like, "Oh my god, I was sexually molested." It's like, "No, no, 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 no." So that's why I'm not a fan of hypnotism. I feel that it's therapist led. It's the client is not empowered. EMDR, it's clients empowered, they're present, and it's client led.
Gosh, it's so different. I'm glad to hear that actually, because I'd be tempted to have some myself, but I don't think I can be hypnotized, and I'm sure everyone says that, and so that had put me off. So it's good to know that. Okay, bearing that in mind, are there any side effects, negative side effects to EMDR?
Well, there's some risks with, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important, depending on what you're coming to, to work on with a therapist. If you're coming for like performance anxiety or things that are pretty, kind of low on the Richter scale, you can have someone who is basic trained and it's not their main lane, and they it's not necessarily going to cause major issues. But again, severe trauma, any sort of complex trauma, big T traumas, you want to make sure that you have someone that is advanced trained, because dissociation, um, if you are not trained, you won't know how to manage dissociation, which is a very normal response to trauma. So there's nothing wrong with dissociation because it's a normal response to trauma, but you need to make sure that the therapist is well trained. Um, I would say, just like any trauma modality, a lot of times it gets worse before it gets better. Like, we're kicking stuff up. Like, so the it's not a magic wand. I will say that it does get accused of being a magic wand, but that's when you've gone through all 8 phases.
Right.
Um, After, I always tell my clients, like after just doing an EMDR session, or I do a lot of intensives, is you're gonna be tired. Like, you have activated your brain, your body, like, it's exhausting. A lot of people are just like, "Oh my god, I feel like I ran a marathon." They are, sometimes headaches, sometimes, vivid dreams is a big one. Very vivid dreams, that absolutely can, happen.
Well, there's another rabbit hole that I really want to go into in another podcast, dreams and maybe Carl Jung and all of that. But not, I guess, I guess not for now. Now, I'm sure that there are lots of other techniques that you could bring in alongside EMDR. In fact, I've seen from your website that you do work with other techniques. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, techniques, do you mean like the ego states and attachment? Is that kinda what you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
polyvagal
So
theory and those sorts of things.
So
Yes.
that, to me, for me, because of my where I the type of clients I work with, that complex trauma, I do incorporate ego states, polyvagal theory, and attachment into my work, which, anybody who really does work with that really severe trauma, those are areas that to be focused on. So ego states, that is more of, that comes up because it's a different part of us. So I talk a lot, it's called parts work. So often people's response to trauma is that scared 5-year-old, or that rebellious teenager. And so when they are responding in EMDR, and they say something and it sounds like a very young part of them, I'm like, "How old are you there?" "Oh, I'm 7 and I'm ba 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 ba." It's ego states, is really recognizing the different parts of us. We all have different parts, various age development. There's various parts, and that's a whole nother conversation as far as really doing the deep dive. Polyvagal theory. So polyvagal theory is really incorporating that body's natural response to trauma. So that's that fight, flight, freeze, also fawn, recognizing where it is in the body. So incorporating the body is such a huge part of healing trauma. It's a huge book here in the States. I'm not sure about there. Body Keeps the Score. Have you ever heard of that book?
We have actually. We interviewed a somatic sex
Oh,
therapist at the beginning of the podcast, and she mentioned that book.
okay,
Yes.
see? Yay, I'm so glad to hear. I mean, that was life-changing, and that is the book, I will say, that changed my life. I was in grad school, and, I was reading about, because I wanted to be a trauma therapist. I mean, I knew that go in grad school, and then I was reading that book, and he talks about EMDR in the book, and I was just like, "Ah," and that was, I remember where I was sitting, who the teacher was, because that was the day that changed my life. So, going back to, Body Keeps the Score, it is so evident and relevant to pay attention to people's bodies when they're when they're responding to trauma. So that's polyvagal theory. And the other one is attachment is, I did my dissertation on John Bowlby. I mean, attachment is such a huge part of us, of people, of interactions, but that relationship attachment, especially primary caregivers, those so much of the work I do is, unfortunately, parents who've really, you know, not done a very good job growing up, whether it's by neglect, abandonment, their transgenerational trauma, um, so really paying attention to attachment of how you felt when you were little, who were your safe people, who were your not safe people, just really getting clear of the attachments in those early formative years because those formative years absolutely affect who you are today and how you roll today.
Interesting you say that. There's actually been quite a bit in our papers over here about narcissistic parent
Oh
syndrome
God. Yes.
thing. Could you dig
Woo!
that a little and explain what that is and why this could help?
Well, again, one of the main I that's one of my specialties, or it just organically happened. I just started seeing so many, people that had, either narcissistic qualities as parents or full-blown NPD, narcissistic personality disorders, and the way that it impacts, children and most of the time, once a narcissist, they're dealing with it today. I deal with, my 50-year-olds, that are still dealing with their narcissistic parents today. I will say that it's more complicated to do the healing through narcissistic abuse, but it's one of my wheelhouses, because so many people that I work with, then also attract narcissistic partners, and it's you could see the through line. There's a lot of really good information out on narcissism, and I think it's gotten a little too overused and not, with some inaccuracies. I will, when sometimes my clients will say certain things, I'm like, that's they're not a narcissist. There's a difference between people that say things that may sound narcissistic versus someone who is a full bore narcissist and all they do is tear people down.
Gosh, yes, good to know. I mean, similar things, I suppose ADHD has become a bit of a buzzword over here. I'm sure not
Mm,
everyone who thinks they have it, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all a good excuse to learn a little bit more about what things really are, isn't it?
absolutely.
So, can people come to people like yourself if they don't necessarily have what they think is a big T trauma?
100%. When I'm doing that in that preliminary stuff, when I'm trying to conceptualize a case, I'm getting a sense of like if there's big T traumas or if there's just a lot of little T traumas. And what is the result of all those little T traumas is a negative belief about themselves. So then I start focusing on their negative cognition. I'm not enough. I'm a piece of shit. I'm this, I'm that. So that's what's running the show. It's not necessarily bad thing happened when I was 5. It's just I have this value of myself that is so low. So then what I do, or anybody that's trained in 8-phase protocol of EMDR, we say we have figured out that their primary negative cognition is, I'm worthless, I'm unworthy, something of that. And then we pull it back to when was the beginning? When did you first think that you were unworthy? Like, what was the event? And it could be something that doesn't necessarily be like, oh, that's a big deal. It could be just those little T's of like, oh, when my dance teacher said ba 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 ba, and my parents agreed. That's not a big trauma, but that laid the groundwork of all the different times when people were treated a certain way. And so, with the negative cognition, the rule of thumb is I go back to either the earliest event that's got some charge, got a little bit of charge. Oh, yeah, when I think about that dance teacher, oh, yeah, that's a 5. I haven't really thought about that in a long time, but you're right. That really, really affected me. Or we go back to, so I'm not worthy. What's the biggest example of that? Oh, well, when I was in college, ba 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 happened. So, so we need an image and a negative cognition to do EMDR. So again, those images aren't necessarily like big deals, but what happens with EMDR and the way it with the pulsators and when it gets back into that right left brain hemisphere, they're when they're doing the reprocessing and they're reporting back and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and it's like the 50 things or more or less that created a belief system of I'm not enough and I'm not worthy. And therefore, it starts to be very clear why they've gotten to this, belief system. And EMDR, the reason why I love it so much is it's not just about that negative cognition. It organically, it by healing the brain, it switches that negative belief from I'm not worthy going through its own path. And every person is different where they need to go for their brain to heal. So it and then at the end of when we know that we're, like, on the other side of this particular belief system, they're like, "I am worthy. I am enough. I am this." You start hearing them say different things about themselves, and that's not true, "This is who I am today." And then you know that you have arced from that negative cognition all the way over to, a positive belief, and that's when we get to the other phases of EMDR, which I haven't mentioned. We install a positive belief, whether it's, and it's organically come up. I'm not saying, "Oh, I can tell now you are worthy. I can tell now that you feel lovable." I'm not telling you anything. It comes up naturally, and that's why I love it. Because sometimes when it comes up, I'm like, "Wow, I wouldn't have expected that. That's so amazing." It really is. It's just I love what I do. I sit there and just it's mind-blowing. So then we do what's called installing. So once someone's like organically, they're like, "Okay, I am worthy." Like, "I believe that today." And you can tell like in their posture that they're like, "Yes." So then we go back and we take the pulsators again and we install it. So, the way I do it is I want them to, say that mantra of I'm worthy or whatever it may be and the emotions that come up with that. And sometimes people will stand up like do like a power pose. Like I want them to really feel it like I'm worthy, I'm powerful, or I'm loved. And and what they're wearing and what they would say like and they're not telling me this is all they're thinking it. I'm just kind of witnessing the exterior of it. Um, and once they've installed that positive cognition, which is, and that's done in literally, a couple minutes. Um, then the last couple phases of EMDR is we do a body scan. Again, we talk about the back to the body. We do a body scan. I like to start from the head going down, and they just kind of they scan their body to see if there's any residual effects of the trauma, like a little feeling a little something in their chest, and if so, what do they need to do to kind of dissipate that, to push it out of their body? Some people like to bring light. Some people like to just have a way of pushing it out of their body. But they scan their body very slowly, very methodically. It's not something I do fast at all because we wanna clear the body. Again, body keeps the score, um, and move that out. And then the next phase is doing anything that maybe we have discussed previously to just make sure they're calm and that they feel in their body and that we are on the other side of this. And then the last phase is what are we gonna work on next? Like, or sometimes it's, again, I do intensives, which people will fly in, or people that live local, I will spend a lot of time over a couple days with somebody. So, like, when we're done, we're kinda like and we're finished. But for the weekly clients or the ones that, come regularly, so sometimes people will have come for maybe relationships, being with a narcissist, and we've cleared that trauma of why they married a narcissist, but we have very clear that it's all because dad or mom or so and so was a narcissist. So then we'll reevaluate what we're going to work on next, and normally they're just like, "We need to work on dad, don't we?" I'm like, "Yeah." So they just know, they just know. It's just like, of course we do. But, and that's the other thing I think super interesting, about EMDR. Sorry, I love what I do, so I get super excited.
Oh, good. Great. I love it.
I had a gal, again, came to me. She was had been in a 6-year relationship. He had cheated on her. like 5 years prior. And they had a really toxic relationship. I mean, it was a mess. Uh, so she wanted to do EMDR on back on when he cheated on her, the many years ago. And so we started almost immediately, like we're talking within the first 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I was doing very long sessions with her. So um her brain, it kept going back to dad, kept going back to dad. And so I pay attention, and so was she. It wasn't had really nothing to do with the boyfriend. He was a symptom. He was a symptom of how she felt growing up about the dad, and that's a whole, that's a was a whole nother issue. And so we stopped, and she goes, we're not in the right we're this isn't where we need to be. And this is why I love it that it's client led. Like, it becomes very clear. They're like, "Yeah, it's not about him, is it?" I'm like, "No, it's not about him. He's just a symptom. You're with him, and it was you stayed with this man who cheated on you because of the core wound." The core wound. So, we then reevaluated, redid everything, did everything focusing on the dad because that was the core wound. And as we heal the core wound, like all those people that she was with that were, cheaters or just didn't show up for her, they got healed because it was all in that same lane, same negative belief system, same trauma.
It reminds me of conversations we had with a kinesiologist in a recent episode as well, where you deal with the right thing, and actually then you clear that. You're clearing it for
You're
many
clearing
other
it.
things as well. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Bryn, I think you better tell people where you are, how to find you.
I'm in Los Angeles, California. My socials are Recover, Heal, Bloom. My main platform is Instagram. That's my main lane. I'm technically on others. Um, Only a handful of advanced trained complex trauma EMDR therapists in this part of the country. So a lot of times people will travel to see me, which is just super amazing. And they'll come in for multiple days. And I see clients weekly, and I see them with these intensives. But again, Los Angeles, California.
How fantastic that if you could take the time, you could just concentrate and nail it
Oh
in.
yeah, it's great, and when it's really fascinating when people will invest in themselves and they will be like, "I will fly out for multiple days." Someone can come in, whether locally drive in, come in on a Thursday, and what we've done by Sunday is absolutely remarkable.
And of course, your socials are full, as you said, with interesting tidbits of information about the therapy, what it means, how it works, etc. So it's very, very much worth checking that out.
So my main lanes on socials are is EMDR and trauma and narcissistic abuse, dissociation. Those are probably my three top or four top topics.
Okay, well, listeners, you know where to go. Mercedes Cusik, thank you so much for joining us on the Flock and Hive podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure it's been to talk with you.
Well, I am gutted. I am not going to be in LA anytime soon.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So, does she not do this online?
No, no, this is very much something you have to be physically present for. I think there's quite a bit of kit. I think with the bilateral stimulation element.
That's so interesting because every other therapist we've talked to across all our podcasts have offered that as a service, haven't they? And I've always been a bit like, oh, does that put a bit of a chasm between the ability to properly therapize, like not discrediting any of our other guests, and actually once they've discussed how it's possible, totally believe in it. But there is something about this having to be physically reactive. You have to be in that space that makes it seem really like it would be really powerful.
Mm. Yes, I agree. And especially she talks about her intenses. So that's when people fly to her or visit her and stay with her for a few days and just nail it and get it all done. Boom. But they have to physically be there,
I'm tempted.
yeah. Do it.
Why don't we pretend that we're doing the kind of sister trip and then just fuck off and actually go and sort ourselves out once and for all as a duo?
That would be a sister trip.
Well, we were talking about going doing acid together to heal, but maybe we should just fly to LA.
Let's do that first. But yes, we do have Professor Nutt coming back to talk about psilocybin, by the way. Excited about that. Yeah, but anyway, back to Mercedes.
I do love how she's open about her tumultuous past and all her how her therapy has led her to wanting to help others, and I think that gives such gravitas and credibility and heart to it as well, and add that to it having to be in person. It really appeals to me. But I also like how she very much follows the narrative of a lot of our other therapists we spoke to about how the brain does its own healing. The body knows what to do. It's all there. We've got all the tools we need and we just need to access it via listening. And she references, of course, the body keeps the score that keeps coming up in our lives and previously in the podcasts.
Yeah,
Emily King, the sex therapist, brought it up way back in early series one, didn't she? So it's very much a flock and hive fundamental, I think, that we all need to read if we're on this journey.
definitely both of us for crying out loud.
It's quite an interesting link, her sobriety to this, because ultimately, if you need to become sober, it's because you've got to the point of just basically numbing with booze.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
and this is the opposite of that, isn't it? Which is so daunting.
I think it's daunting for a lot of people because, from what she said, and I think we all know that you might go in thinking that there's a problem to solve, but actually you need to solve something else and you're not sure what that is. And that's terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, the dad issue was very interesting what she was talking about.
Mm. So I'm interested in doing it myself just because I know that there's something in there, and I don't know what it is, but I am sure it would come out pretty quickly. But again, that is quite a scary thing.
Yeah. But what is nice in that respect is it feels like you don't have to do a lot of digging. 'Cause, she does all the preliminary sessions, which is sort of, maybe digging in a sense in terms of just, like, actually getting an understanding of why you want to come here. But the way she talks about that, target image, that snapshot, which doesn't even need to be from the experience, it can be from a moment before or after, and that's all you need to work from. I think it's a really gentle approach, a really forgiving approach. And you're not having to bring up all these things or try and desperately search for something like you're saying you don't necessarily know that's there, but there's that one image. That is fascinating, and I'd never even thought that that's how a therapy can start, with just something that isn't even necessarily connected to the experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It just feels like it's really thorough, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From the preparation to finally sort of in number 4, series, step 4, having the physical therapy to everything that happens afterwards as well.
And the responsibility she takes in making sure if you're activated, you are grounded and then brought back down to earth, and not so, to avoid dissociation. It seems so holistically managed and sensitively done.
I mean, it does. I just want to tell you a very quick story because that's just reminded me of something quite bad.
She says bad whilst laughing.
But I mean, just like thinking about it, it's like, what the fuck? Pardon my French. I went to East 15 acting school, the method one, which is very Stanislavski, very, step into the character shoes. Um, Really fun in 2002. We, I mean, whose idea was this? Fuck. We did a project on the Twin Towers,
What? Oh
right?
my god, stop there.
We had to take on a real life character that we'd seen something about in the news, who had some sort of experience of this, and we had to find out what we could about them, and then we had to build the rest and become that character, right? Pretty damn traumatic, and it really was. We presented these to each other, and then like the the teacher just went, okay, well done everyone, that was really good, and then we moved on. So he'd led us all to an absolute state of trauma, and then we just had to forget about it completely. I've just thought about that now. I
Who
mean,
did you embody?
do you know what? I can't even remember. That's very unlike me to. I remember other people's stories.
Well, that's probably because it was so traumatic you buried it. That'll probably come up in your EMDR session.
It might do. Yeah.
You're gonna think that you were in 9/11 when really you were in a basement with Beverly Knight that night, and I can vouch for that.
Yeah. Yes, we were both randomly in a music video for Beverly Knight. Get up, and lonely
Holy
ground.
ground, you don't know. Though I'm
Yeah.
not in it because I got scared and didn't go in the next day because 9/11, whereas you were like, "I'm going back."
Yeah, and I wasn't even in it either, hilariously. I can't find myself anywhere.
I thought you could.
No, I think might have seen a little bit of my face in the crowd at some point, and that was it. No, but that was really weird. That was going in, doing this, and then coming out and watching the TV. What the hell is gonna happen?
I remember it was the biggest head fuck because we were being heavily directed in this music video and also loads of hanging around, which is what happens. And
Yeah.
then it didn't really stop. Production didn't really take notice. And yeah, it was very contradictory. I didn't really know how to feel.
But what was lovely, I did have a bit of closure about that traumatic event when I got to meet Beverly Knight last year at a little private charity event, and I just went up to her and said, "I was there on September 11th in your video," and we had a really nice moment talking about it. And she's like, she how weird she felt, and she didn't know what to do, and just she was so grateful that people were still supporting her, which is nice. That was a nice little closed door.
That is nice because I often actually, whenever she's on telly, I actually do have a little bit of a side eye because I'm like, I don't think she dealt with it very well. But I was a tiny little teen and yeah, I now can understand through her lens the responsibility of a massive production and and herself not knowing what to do.
She wouldn't have known. No, we didn't know what was going on, did we?
Did you tell her, "But I can't see I was there for 3 fucking days, I can't see my face once."
No, but if she's back at the same event next year, I'm just gonna barge onto the stage, get my minutes of fame. Finally!
So for me, the kind of reprogramming element of therapy, I'm quite familiar with because I've done some NLP, which is neuro linguistic programming, which is sort of a stablemate of hypnotherapy, but you're not really taken under. And it's, in a nutshell, changing your inner language to it's kind of it's like affirmations and changing how you talk to yourself to change your reality. But at first, the therapeutic process is identifying how you talk to yourself and how you imagine yourself in situations and where your blockages and limiting beliefs and things like that are. But as Mercedes mentions, hypnotherapy and this kind of therapy can be quite suggestive and quite leading, and that's why I didn't really get on with it because I'm quite a skeptical, cynical person. And
No.
and any chance of like, hold on, fucking, did you just tell me to think that? I kind of didn't get on with it. And I was in this very posh place in Harley Street, number one Harley Street, with this nice guy, but I sort of could see through it. And that's put me off of that kind of programming or like, how do you um revalue yourself, reshape yourself, whereas this feels like you go behind the scenes, behind any fluff and language and flowery stuff, and it is activating the sides of your brain to get to your amygdala, and that's what I like about this.
Mm. This appeals to me for exactly the same reasons. And looking back again at what Mercedes was talking about with the EMDR, she brings in a lot of other disciplines as well. And to be honest, each one of those could be a podcast in its own right. But one is polyvagal theory, and I think we should just sort of maybe start that conversation before picking it up another time. No.
Yes, I mean, I've always known about fight or flight from being really little and having panic attacks really quite early. Dad, who was a GP, was very supportive in it, and he explained what was happening in my body. The adrenaline and the anxiety is a fight or flight response. So I always knew that, and it was only sort of later that I've learned about the freeze response, which is that kind of paralysis to do anything. So even if you're in danger, but the fawn element, I had
Mm.
no idea about. That is fascinating. It's basically flirting your way out of danger, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, what people pleasing, just like appeasing anything you can do to avoid that conflict and to not be harmed and to get approval from others is probably how we'd see it more in the day to day rather than the tiger.
The tiger. Yeah, how do you flirt with a tiger? But,
Yeah.
I feel like it's quite sinister because it's quite manipulative. It's like almost in the same, vein as love bombing, like getting what you want by being nice. Kind of it doesn't sit that nicely.
Yeah, like you've highlighted in your mind an aggressor or an authority figure, which obviously is not the best kind of authority figure. And so your reaction is to just please them, to fawn all over them, in order to survive,
That's
essentially.
mental.
Yeah.
Done that millions of times.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I can think of many, but I honestly, I would love to either to get Mercedes back again, or to speak to somebody else who specializes in this one and only thing. But I think polyvagal theory is something that we all of us humans need to know more about. I need to read the books. My husband's reading them at the moment, and he's been very good at sort of dropping information on me. But I need to sort it out myself.
But why would you think it's really important to know?
I think it's important to understand your own reactions to certain things and to certain people and certain situations, because that kind of knowledge is power.
Yeah, if you're employing these tactics and you realize what you're doing, you realize, I feel like I'm not in a safe place. And then you start, oh, am I in the right place then if I don't even feel safe, if I'm having to fawn?
Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, polyvagal theory, story for another time. But I think that's probably a good place to wrap up this episode, don't you? So we can
Yeah.
go and book our tickets to LA, go and see Mercedes.
Yes, please. If you're new to us, please come and follow us on the socials at Flock and Hive, and check out the website at flockandhive.com for all the related articles to everything we talk about in our podcast. We take a deeper dive, and these will all be starting up again now. Series 3 is underway.
Thank you for that. If you do like the podcast, do rate it highly. Thank you. And share it and tell your friends, because it's all about getting new people to listen. So that hopefully they can get something out of it as well.
And also, if you have any ideas that you want us to discuss, or recommendations of topics, or if you are an expert in something, it can be really niche, come and chat to us. And we'd love to spread the word with what you've got to share with the world.
Yeah, we are so grateful to all our fantastic guests, including the wonderful Mercedes Cusik, who joined us today, all about EMDR. Make sure you give her a follow. But until next week, thank you very much for listening, and we shall see you then. Ta-ta!
Bye.